Every morning I button up my white coat, greet the children with a smile, and try not to think about the tiny heartbeat I'll never hear again. They think I'm kind. They don't know I died the day I lost her. The nurse's office always smells like lemon disinfectant and dry erase markers. The kids call me Miss Grace, and I smile at them like I'm whole. I patch up scraped knees, hand out tissues, and tell them they're going to be okay. They don't know that I'm not. 7 months ago, I lost my daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 21 weeks along when her heartbeat stopped. I should have stayed home. I told my husband I wasn't feeling right. That the flight was too long. That I was dizzy, exhausted, afraid. But Ethan was charming and persistent, always was. He said I needed a break from all that anxious mom stuff, that we deserved one last getaway before the baby came. "You're not made of glass, Grace," he said with a wink. "Come on. It's just a vacation." We flew to a coastal resort in Portugal. 2 nights in, I woke up soaked in blood. I remember the sterile hospital lights, the doctor's solemn face, the cold phrase that shattered everything: "There's no heartbeat." When we came back, the nursery furniture had arrived. The crib, the rocker, the framed print that said "Welcome, little one." Ethan didn't say much. He didn't touch the boxes. Just went back to work, business trips, long meetings, late nights. His eyes stopped meeting mine. I told myself he was grieving in his own way. But deep down, I knew. I knew because he stopped saying her name. I knew because when I cried, he left the room. Because his apologies dried up too quickly. Because the only thing he gave me anymore was silence. Everyone used to say we were the perfect couple. Ethan with his easy confidence, always the center of attention. Me, the quiet, steady one. We looked good in pictures. We knew how to play the part. But I was the one left holding the shattered pieces of our life. Now I'm back at school, helping other people's children feel safe, loved, and heard. I give them everything I have, what I never got back from Ethan. What Lily will never get from either of us. Sometimes I hear her laugh in the voice of a little girl outside. I see her in the curls of a child running across the playground. I catch myself reaching out before remembering, she's not there. Grief didn't destroy my marriage. Neglect did. It started with a scar. A pale, thin line across the jaw, the kind you don't forget once you've memorized it. I hadn't seen it in years. Not since I was 12 and watching a woman drown. It was at Ethan's mother's 70th birthday. The whole family had gathered at their lake house, the one that always smelled like cigars and antique furniture. I was sitting at the end of the long wooden table, picking at my salad while everyone else laughed too loudly, drank too much, and pretended we were all one big happy clan. Ethan had disappeared again, claiming calls from the office. I didn't even look up from my plate when he left the table. I knew the drill. Business trip. Urgent client. Whatever lie he'd picked for the week. I was about to excuse myself when I saw her, the new neighbor everyone had been whispering about. She walked in with a tray of deviled eggs and that suburban smile people wear when they're trying to fit in. Her hair was lighter than I remembered. She looked older, of course. But the moment she turned her head and I caught sight of the scar. The fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. I knew that face. I knew it like I knew my own. Because she used to be my stepmother. Her name was Margaret. She married my dad when I was 10. And one day, she vanished. The police said she probably drowned. Her car was found near the river. A single shoe left behind like a bad fairy tale. No body. No closure. Just a note, "I'm sorry. I couldn't stay." I was 12. My dad never spoke of her again. And now here she was. Holding a tray of appetizers and chatting with Ethan's mother like they'd known each other for years. I couldn't eat. I couldn't speak. I just watched. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and Ethan had predictably vanished again, there was a commotion in the hallway. I peeked out to see Ethan's mother slumped on the floor, gasping, clutching her chest. It was Margaret, the neighbor, who acted first. She dropped to her knees, took control like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Called 911. Administered aspirin. Stayed calm. She saved her life. Hours later, in the hospital waiting room, I cornered her. "You're not just some neighbor," I said. She froze. Her eyes flicked to the scar I was staring at. And then, she nodded. "My name used to be Margaret Holloway," she said quietly. "I was married to your father. I watched you drown," I whispered. She looked down at her hands. "No. You watched me escape." The story spilled out in fragments. The bruises. The isolation. The fear. My father had been charming to the world and cruel behind closed doors. When she realized he'd started turning his temper toward me, she knew she had to go. But back then, no one would have believed her. So she faked it, left her car, left a note, and vanished. "I thought he'd hurt you if I took you with me," she said, her voice cracking. "And I thought he'd never let me see you again if I stayed." My hands were trembling. "Why now?" I asked. "Why live next door to my husband's family?" "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't recognize you. Not until tonight." I didn't know what to believe. But in her face, I didn't see a liar. I saw the woman who used to brush my hair, sing lullabies in the kitchen, and leave notes in my lunchbox that said, "You are brave." I hadn't seen her in 20 years. And now she had come back from the dead. I didn't cry when Margaret told me the truth. I didn't even ask for proof. Because deep down, I already knew. My father had always walked into a room like he owned the air and left people breathless with charm. But behind closed doors, I saw the way he gripped the edge of a chair when he was angry. The way silence followed him like a shadow. I just hadn't wanted to believe he was capable of what she described. But denial has a short shelf life. And mine had just expired. I returned home from the hospital at sunrise, my head pounding, my heart raw. Ethan wasn't home. I wasn't surprised. He came back 2 days later. His usual excuse, "Sorry, babe, the flight was delayed." No call. No explanation. Just tossed his duffel on the floor and reached for a beer like nothing had changed. I stared at him like I was meeting him for the first time. Because I knew now what I hadn't wanted to admit, that the man I married, like my father before him, was a liar with perfect timing. But the universe wasn't done unraveling. The very next day, I got a knock on the school nurse's door. A man in a charcoal suit introduced himself as Daniel Reeves. "Internal security," he said, flashing a badge with quiet urgency. "For what company?" I asked. He smiled tightly. "Your husband's." That's when my world split open again. Ethan wasn't just disappearing for another woman. He was disappearing to commit fraud. Mr. Reeves sat across from me at the tiny round table I usually used to convince kids that their headaches weren't fatal. But nothing could fix the one that formed when he told me what he knew. "For the last 9 months, your husband's been passing confidential materials to a competing firm," he said, sliding a file across the table. "Emails. Phone logs. Surveillance footage. It's all here." I stared at the manila folder. "I didn't touch it." "He used your Wi-Fi," Reeves added. "Your home computer. We have reason to believe you weren't involved, but we're required to follow the trail." I wanted to scream. Or laugh. Or maybe both. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because there's a federal investigation now. And because his lawyer is already making noise about pinning some of it on you, saying you shared the computer, that you may have unknowingly assisted." My mouth went dry. I felt my palms begin to sweat. "I have nothing to do with his work." "I believe you. But believe me, he's not protecting you." A week later, Ethan was arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to Mexico. The news made headlines in local business papers: executive caught in espionage scandal. The photo showed him in handcuffs, still in his designer coat, trying to look unfazed. I watched the clip at home, on the very couch where I used to wait for his return. And then, a new message came through, from her. The woman he'd been cheating with. It was short, sharp, and dripping with guilt. I didn't know he was married. I'm so sorry. That made two of us. It turns out that while I was grieving our daughter, Ethan was comforting himself in someone else's arms, and selling out his company at the same time. When people ask what betrayal feels like, I don't say, heartbreak. I say, it's the sound of a man zipping his suitcase and walking away from the wreckage he caused. It's silence where an apology should be. And it's finally realizing that love, real love, doesn't look like this. They say grief is like the ocean, it comes in waves. But mine had turned into something else entirely. A tide that never pulled back. Ethan's arrest made headlines for about 2 days. His face was splashed across news feeds, his name suddenly synonymous with betrayal, both marital and corporate. I didn't go to the arraignment. I didn't answer the calls from reporters. I didn't even open the mail from his lawyer. I was done giving him my energy. But when I returned to the hospital to check on Ethan's mother, the woman he'd neglected just as much as me, something unexpected happened. I met someone. His name was Dr. Michael Bennett. He was the cardiac surgeon who operated on her. Mid-40s, calm voice, eyes that held steady even when the world shook around him. He walked into the waiting room, glanced down at the clipboard, and said gently, "Mrs. Carson is stable. You can see her in a few minutes." "Thank you," I replied, standing too quickly, then nearly stumbling. He caught my arm, not tightly, just enough to steady me. "You all right?" he asked, brows knitting. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just, haven't eaten today." He gave a small nod, then reached into his pocket and handed me a protein bar. "Try not to faint in the cardiology wing. We've got enough patients already." I laughed, an actual laugh. The first one in weeks. It was nothing, really. Just a moment. But it stayed with me. Over the next few days, as I sat by Ethan's mother's bedside and watched monitors beep and nurses adjust IVs, Dr. Bennett would check in. Always polite. Always composed. He'd ask how I was doing, and wait for an actual answer. One day, I broke. I told him about the miscarriage. About the husband who had become a stranger. About the woman from my childhood who came back from the dead. About the investigation. The lies. The weight of carrying it all alone. He didn't interrupt. Didn't flinch. Just listened. And then he said something I never expected. "You've survived so much more than you give yourself credit for." That's when I cried. Because no one had said that to me. Not once. Not even myself. After Mrs. Carson was discharged, I thought I'd never see him again. But a week later, he showed up at the school, as a guest speaker for the career day I forgot I helped organize. He smiled when he saw me. "You again," he said, offering a small wave. "This place has better lighting than the ICU." We got coffee after the kids had gone home. Talked for 2 hours. Nothing romantic. Just kind. Real. Easy. Michael didn't try to fix me. He didn't offer advice or tell me I was strong. He just sat across from me like someone who saw all my cracks, and didn't think I was broken. That night, I went home and opened the drawer where I'd hidden the divorce papers. I signed them. With Margaret, the woman who used to be my stepmother, back in my life, and Michael's quiet presence reminding me that not all men disappear when things get hard, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Like I had a future. Like I could build something new. The town looked exactly the same. The streets were still lined with cracked sidewalks and stubborn oak trees. The same rusted swing set creaked at the park across from the grocery store. But as I pulled onto the street where I once lived, the street where my childhood ended. It felt like stepping into a memory I didn't know I was ready to face. Margaret sat beside me in the passenger seat. She hadn't said much during the drive, just watched the road like it held all the answers she didn't dare ask. We hadn't been back since the day she faked her death. I never thought I'd return either, not to this place, where so many nights were filled with fear, where the wallpaper in my old bedroom still held the shadows of raised voices and slammed doors. But something inside me needed to go back. I needed to know if the past could ever stop feeling like a threat. We parked outside a small white house with a sagging porch and peeling paint. I remembered how big it felt when I was little. Now it looked tired. Hollow. I don't even know if they still live here, I murmured. Margaret didn't answer. Her hands were clenched tight in her lap. The door opened before I could knock. And there they were. My real parents. I don't mean Margaret and my father, I mean the people I barely remembered. The ones who were forced to let me go when I was just a toddler. The ones who were told I drowned in a lake one summer, a lie crafted to cover my stepfather's tracks when he took me away and never looked back. Margaret had told me the full story weeks ago, how she met my father when I was 3. How he convinced everyone that my birth parents were unfit. How he faked papers, manipulated systems, and made it look like a custody transfer. And how, when Margaret realized what he'd done, and who he really was, it was already too late. Until she ran. Until now. My birth mother gasped when she saw me. A hand flew to her mouth like she couldn't believe I was real. And then, she whispered my name. Grace? It was the first time I'd heard it spoken like that, like it was a prayer. The next few minutes were a blur. Tears, tight embraces, disbelief turning into something too raw for words. My birth father kept shaking his head, like if he blinked, I'd vanish again. We thought you were dead, he kept saying. We mourned you for 20 years. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to the people who loved you once, who lost you before you could even remember their faces? But they held me. Not as a stranger. Not as a ghost. As their daughter. And somehow, I didn't feel like an imposter. Later, we sat on their small back porch, surrounded by old photo albums and the smell of fresh coffee. They showed me pictures of the little girl I used to be, toothy smiles, birthday hats, drawings I didn't remember making. I showed them who I'd become. A nurse. A woman who survived love, loss, and betrayal. A woman who didn't need to be rescued anymore. That night, Margaret and I stayed in a motel nearby. She didn't ask how I felt. She just handed me a cup of tea and sat beside me, silent and solid. And I realized, I wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way that mattered. I had roots again, not tangled in trauma, but in truth. The courtroom was colder than I expected. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the tension. The hush that settles over a room when everyone's waiting for someone to finally get what they deserve. Ethan sat at the defense table in a tailored navy suit, still trying to look like the man he used to be. Confident. Polished. Untouchable. But I could see it, the flicker of fear behind his eyes. The slight tremble in his jaw when he thought no one was watching. The arrogant mask slipping, piece by piece. It had been 4 months since the arrest. 4 months since he was dragged off a plane, charged with industrial espionage, fraud, and obstruction. The evidence was overwhelming: emails, wire transfers, a digital trail that wrapped around him like a noose. But somehow, he still looked smug. He hadn't seen me yet. I sat in the second row behind the prosecution's table, hands folded tightly in my lap. Michael was beside me, his calm presence like a lighthouse through fog. On the other side, Margaret sat with quiet resolve. No one said a word. We were here to watch. To witness. To close the chapter. The prosecutor, a woman named Rachel Langford, was sharp as a scalpel. She laid out the facts with precision, never raising her voice, never grandstanding. Just truth. Plain and undeniable. She described how Ethan leaked company secrets for personal gain. How he used shared resources, our home network, my devices, to mask his tracks. How he played the grieving husband while funneling confidential data to a rival firm in exchange for luxury trips, expensive gifts, and under-the-table payments. The defense tried to paint him as stressed, overworked, misunderstood. They implied he was pressured, manipulated. That maybe, just maybe, he hadn't known what he was doing. And then they brought me up. Not to testify, but to blame. She shared the devices, the defense attorney argued. She had access to the same files. Can we really say she was unaware? My stomach dropped. But I didn't move. Rachel Langford rose slowly. Let me be clear, she said, turning toward the judge. The evidence shows that Mrs. Carson was not only uninvolved, she was victimized. Her husband used her grief and her trust as a smokescreen for his crimes. She handed over a printed photo, one I hadn't seen in months. It was me, curled up on the couch, asleep, visibly ill. And Ethan in the background, laptop open, transferring files. He hadn't even waited until I'd healed from the miscarriage. When Rachel rested her case, the room felt heavier, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see how Ethan would squirm his way out. But this time, he couldn't. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When the foreman stood, my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Guilty, he read aloud. On all counts. Ethan didn't flinch. But his jaw twitched. The only betrayal of emotion he'd allow. Sentencing would come later. But the verdict was enough for now. I stood when the judge dismissed the room. Ethan's eyes finally met mine. There was no apology in them. No recognition of what he took from me, not just Lily, not just our marriage, but the sense of safety I had clung to for far too long. And I gave him nothing in return. Not anger. Not pity. Just silence. Later, outside the courthouse, Michael took my hand. How do you feel? He asked. I didn't know how to answer. Not lighter. Not free. But finished. I had spent years being dragged behind someone else's choices. Now, for the first time in a long time, I was walking forward, on my own 2 feet. The chapel was small, tucked behind a row of maple trees that had just started turning gold. There were only 30 chairs inside, each one filled with someone who mattered. Not someone who pretended to. Not someone who showed up for appearances. Real people. The kind that stayed. I stood at the back, bouquet in hand, wearing a dress that was simple and soft, nothing like the one I wore the first time I said, I do. That one was chosen to impress. This one? It felt like me. Free of lace and pretense. Clean lines, warm fabric, comfort in every stitch. The music started. Nothing grand, just a cello, low and slow. And then the doors opened. Michael stood at the end of the aisle. No tux. Just a navy suit and that steady smile that had become my anchor. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. Each footfall felt like a closing door behind me. On betrayal. On grief. On everything I used to accept in the name of love. I passed Margaret, who wiped a tear but smiled proudly. I passed my birth parents, who were now simply my parents, no prefixes, no complications. Just the people who had come back into my life like a gift I didn't know how much I needed. And then I reached him. Michael took my hands, warm and steady, and whispered, "Ready?" I nodded. Not just for the ceremony. For everything. The vows we wrote ourselves were short, not because we had little to say, but because we knew what mattered. I won't promise perfection, he said. Only presence. Honesty. And the kind of love that stands still when everything else is falling apart. I said, I promise not to run, even when I'm scared. I promise to build, not just survive. And to let this love be a safe place for both of us. We didn't exchange rings. Instead, we planted a tree in the garden behind the chapel. A red maple, the same kind that had lined the street where I was found. "Let it grow as we do," he said, covering the roots with soil. We held the reception at a vineyard down the road. There was no DJ, no formal dance, just laughter, food, and the clink of glasses. Michael's colleagues and my school friends mingled with my newly reunited family. There was no drama. No pity. Only joy. As the sun dipped low, I wandered to the edge of the field alone for a moment, watching the light stretch over the horizon. And then I felt it. A small flutter. I rested a hand over my stomach. The baby wasn't due for months. But that tiny movement, subtle, tentative, was a reminder. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was a new story entirely. I turned back to the vineyard, where Michael was holding court with a glass of lemonade and a crooked tie. And I smiled. This wasn't the life I planned. It was better. I never expected to see him again. My father, the man who took everything and called it love. Who wore charm like armor and used silence as a weapon. After Margaret faked her death and disappeared, he'd moved on like nothing happened. Remarried. Rebuilt. Rewritten. He had no idea what had unraveled. Until now. The letter came 2 weeks after the wedding. A thin envelope, no return address, postmarked from a neighboring state. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands didn't shake. They just waited. Inside was a single piece of paper, neatly folded. His handwriting, still neat, still familiar, filled the page. Grace. I heard about the trial. About Ethan. About your marriage. I also heard about Margaret. I know she's alive. I won't insult you with apologies. I imagine they wouldn't mean much now. I only want to say this, I know I failed you. In more ways than I can name. I thought I was protecting you by keeping things quiet, by making decisions for you. But I see now that all I did was steal your voice. I took it when you were a child, and I never gave it back. I don't expect forgiveness. But if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. No expectations. Just me, a man finally learning what it means to be wrong. Dad. I read it 3 times. And then I put it in a drawer. I didn't burn it. I didn't respond. I just let it exist. Because some wounds aren't meant to be reopened. Some ghosts can't be buried, but they don't deserve to haunt you either. That weekend, I drove alone to the lake house where Margaret had once vanished. She stayed behind, not out of fear, but because she said I needed to see it on my own. The dock was still there. Weathered, cracked. I stood at the edge, the same spot where I had once thought she disappeared forever. The water was calm. A dragonfly skated across its surface. I closed my eyes. And for the first time, I didn't see trauma. I saw survival. I didn't stay long. Just long enough to whisper the words I never got to say as a child. I'm still here. The wind picked up gently, like an answer. As I drove back home, I passed a diner with flickering lights and an old jukebox visible through the window. Michael would have loved it. The baby kicked softly as if agreeing. This was my life now. Messy, unfinished, full of open roads and letters without endings. And that was okay. Because not every story needs a confrontation to have closure. Sometimes peace is choosing not to return fire. I used to flinch when I walked past the baby section at Target. It was like my body remembered before my mind did, the sharp ache behind my ribs, the nausea that wasn't morning sickness, the cold panic of silence on an ultrasound screen. But not this time. This time, I reached out. My fingers ran over tiny onesies and impossibly soft socks. I paused at a stuffed elephant and smiled without crying. Progress. Michael met me at the end of the aisle, holding a box of diapers with a look of equal parts confusion and awe. Do we really need this many sizes? We need everything, I said. We're clueless. He grinned. Speak for yourself. I read half a parenting book last night. I'm basically a certified expert. Was it the one with cartoons or actual medical advice? He didn't answer, just winked and added another blanket to the cart. Later, in the nursery we painted together, soft sage green with clouds stenciled above the crib. I sat on the floor folding onesies while he tried to assemble the changing table. It was crooked. Completely uneven. We laughed until we couldn't breathe. And for a moment, I forgot what it felt like to be haunted. Pregnancy the second time around wasn't easier. It was terrifying in its own way. Every doctor's appointment a minefield of flashbacks, every heartbeat a fragile hope. But this time, I had people who didn't leave the room when I cried. This time, I didn't cry alone. Margaret crocheted a blanket, yellow and white, the same colors she used to make for me when I was small. My parents, the ones who found me again, sent books every week. Children's classics. Picture books. Handwritten notes inside each one. Can't wait to read this to her with you. Even the staff at school noticed the change. I wasn't just the quiet nurse anymore. I was Grace, the one with something growing inside her that wasn't grief. One night, I woke up to the baby kicking harder than usual. Michael stirred beside me. She okay? He mumbled, half asleep. Yeah, I whispered, hand on my stomach. She's strong. He reached over, placed his hand gently where mine rested. I still can't believe this is real, he said. Me neither. I used to think healing would come in grand gestures, apologies, confrontations, some dramatic moment of catharsis. But healing, it turns out, is quieter. It's in the way I stopped checking the door, expecting someone to leave. It's in the softness of folded clothes, the steady hum of a crib mobile, the sound of laughter at 2 a.m. over a half-built dresser. It's in letting joy back in, even if it arrives like a nervous guest, unsure if it's welcome. I'm not whole. But I'm blooming. Slowly. Quietly. And for the first time in years, I'm not afraid of what's next. She arrived just after sunrise. The sky was still a pale gray, streaked with gold, the kind of quiet light that feels like a promise. I remember gripping Michael's hand so hard he winced, and then, just like that, she was here. Screaming. Alive. Perfect. They placed her on my chest, and I swear, the world slowed down. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because I was afraid, but because I had never felt so much love flood me all at once. Her name is Lila James Bennett. Lila, for the daughter I lost. James, after my mother's maiden name, the woman who gave me life twice, once in the beginning and once when she returned to me. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces. Strong lungs. A grip that could crush a finger. She came into this world demanding space, and she had it. The hospital room was warm, filled with soft coos and the steady beeping of machines. Michael never stopped smiling, though I caught him wiping away a tear when he thought I wasn't looking. Later, when it was just the three of us, he whispered, "She's already got your stubborn streak." God help us all, I replied, exhausted, blissful. The next day, we went home, to the nursery we built together, to the crib that waited without shadows. Margaret met us at the door, arms full of meals she'd prepped, just in case, her eyes shining. My parents arrived 2 hours later, carrying books and stuffed animals and the kind of cautious joy that comes from long-lost dreams finally returning. There were no speeches. No grand reconciliations. Just quiet, sacred moments. My father, the one who raised me in silence and apology, never came. I think he knew there was no room in this new world for the kind of love that demanded erasure. And I didn't mourn that. I was too busy rocking my daughter to sleep while sunlight spilled across her cheeks like a blessing. The court finalized the divorce 2 weeks later. Ethan never reached out. He received a 6-year sentence. He's eligible for parole in 4. I won't be there when that happens. My name is off his accounts, out of his reach, out of the narrative he spun for years. I don't hate him. I just don't think about him anymore. Because now, when I wake up, I hear soft breaths and see tiny fists curled against my chest. I smell formula and lavender and hope. I go to the school once a week to check in, bring cookies, hug the kids who still come to the nurse's office just for reassurance. The rest of the time, I am home. Raising a daughter in a space free of secrets. Loving a man who never flinches when I cry, who reads bedtime stories like the words might save us both. And every so often, I walk to the garden behind our house, the one where we planted the tree. It's taller now. Stronger. The leaves are thick and red and dancing in the wind. Like us, it weathered a brutal beginning. But it grows anyway. So do I.